He's contrasting the essential and non-essential dimensions of religion. And the essential element of all religions is its spiritual core. And that's what he's calling Vedanta. Okay? So in contemporary parlance, most of you know that Mark Zuckerberg has renamed Facebook Meta, right? And that's the big thing now, metaverse. So if we want, we can think about Vedanta not as a religion, but as a meta-religion. The underlying philosophical basis of all religions. And he explains very clearly what he means by Vedanta as a meta-religion in the epigraph to his book Raja Yoga. This epigraph consists of what I would call 4 Mahamantras, 4 great sayings. Many of you are probably familiar with them, but I'll just read them out to you and then try to unpack them one by one. Number 1, each soul is potentially divine. 2, the goal is to manifest this divinity within by controlling nature, external and internal. 3, do this either by work or worship or psychic control or philosophy, by one or more or all of these, and be free. Work corresponds to karma yoga, worship bhakti yoga, psychic control raja yoga, philosophy jnana yoga. By one or more or all of these yogas, and be free. 4th, this is the whole of religion. Doctrines or dogmas or rituals or books or temples or forms are but secondary details. So let's unpack these one by one. So first, each soul is potentially divine. Notice every word is important. He's being deliberately open. He's not taking a very specific stand on the exact sense in which the soul is divine. Each soul is potentially divine, and there's a good reason for it. He doesn't want to say anything that's going to commit him to some particular sectarian view. Instead, he wants to accommodate many different spiritual philosophies, many different religious views. And this is very much in line with his guru, Sri Ramakrishna. Sri Ramakrishna used to teach Brahman and Shakti are inseparable. Brahman is non-dual pure consciousness. It's the impersonal aspect of God. And Shakti is the personal aspect, the personal dimension of the same infinite divine reality. Swami Vivekananda used to teach the same thing. He said that our religion preaches an impersonal personal God. An impersonal personal God. Okay? And in another place, Swami Vivekananda used to say, for if there is one common doctrine that runs through all our apparently fighting and contradictory sects, it is that all glory, power, and purity are within the soul already. Only, according to Ramanuja, the soul contracts and expands at times. And according to Shankara, it comes under a delusion. Never mind these differences. All admit the truth that the power is there, potential or manifest, it is there. And the sooner you believe that, the better for you. So he's noting that different schools of Vedanta, different spiritual philosophies may have different understandings of exactly how God relates to the soul. According to Shankara, the soul is actually identical with God, because both God and the soul are at bottom nothing but non-dual pure consciousness. Ramanuja says the soul is a portion of the divinity, of the divine. And that soul is not already identical with God, but expands and contracts. In a state of ignorance, it's in a state of contraction. In the state of knowledge of God, it expands to its full manifestation. And Swami Vivekananda says, let's not highlight and emphasize and obsess so much about the differences, these doctrinal disputes. Notice that the language, each soul is potentially divine. That can accommodate Shankara just as much as it accommodates Ramanuja, just as much as it accommodates Christianity or Islam or Hinduism. That was deliberate. Be as broad as possible in defining the nature of the divine and the soul's relation to the divine. That's the first tenet, the first of the 4 key tenets of Vedanta. The divine can be impersonal, it can be personal, it can have any kind of form, it can be formless. Second statement, reminding you, the goal is to manifest this divinity within by controlling nature, external and internal. The goal of every religion is to realize God. We can call it, there are many names for it, call it self-realization, call it enlightenment, illumination, nirvana, but it's the same idea. But how does Swami Vivekananda cash it out? the goal of religion is to manifest our innate divinity. That's the second key statement. You might ask, well, what about that last phrase? By controlling nature, external and internal, it seems very kind of almost technical. That's because of the context. Remember, this is an epigraph to Raja Yoga. He pulled it out of his commentary on Patanjali's Yoga Sutra. Okay? And so we have to understand something about Patanjali's metaphysics. According to Patanjali's school, it's based on Sankhya metaphysics. Both the physical body and our minds are insentient. They belong to nature. And nature is insentient. It's called Prakriti in Sanskrit. Which is very startling to some Westerners when they hear that the mind is insentient. What could it mean that the mind is insentient? The mind is also a subtle form of matter, according to not just Sankhya and Yoga, but also according to Vedanta, actually. But then we say, well, the mind is thinking thoughts and is conscious. No, it's the soul that's conscious. And by mistake, we're identifying ourselves with the mind. And we think that the mind is conscious, but the mind isn't conscious. The soul is illuminating the mind with consciousness. Okay, so that's the basic idea. So now, with that in the background, what Swamiji means by external nature is the physical body. And what he means by internal nature is the mind. That's why the subtitle of the book Raja Yoga is Conquering the Internal Nature. Because Raja Yoga, Patanjali's yoga, is based on conquering the mind. Yoga is chitta vritti nirodha, restraining the mental modifications. So that's what Swamiji means. Controlling nature, external and internal, means by controlling the body, the physical body, but by also, more importantly, controlling the mind. Restraining the mind, self-control. What does he mean in simple English? We have to purify ourselves. We have to try to reduce, attenuate, and ultimately eliminate worldly desires and attachments, and thereby transforming ourselves through spiritual practice. What are these spiritual practices? He explains them in the third Mahamantra, the third great saying. Do this either by work, karma yoga, or worship, bhakti yoga, or psychic control, or meditation, Raja Yoga, Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, or philosophy, Jnana Yoga, the path of knowledge, intellectual reasoning, vichara, by one or more or all of these. This is a very significant qualification. You can do it by any one of these four yogas, by a combination of one or more of the yogas, or by all four of the yogas, and be free. Now, one thing to keep in mind is, notice the language here again. It's very broad. He's not saying Jnana Yoga means Shankara's Advaita Vedanta. He says philosophy. So it means the path of intellectual reasoning. Any spiritual or religious path that involves intellectual reasoning can count as the path of knowledge or philosophy. Psychic control. He's not limiting it to just Patanjali's very specific kind of Yoga Sutra philosophy. Anything that involves control of the mind can count, right? So he's being very, very broad on purpose. Worship. A Christian can worship just as much as a Muslim, and just as much as a Jew, just as much as a Hindu, right? So he's not defining these yogas in a narrowly Hindu way. He's defining them in a very universal way so that they can apply to all of the religions. And we'll see in a second more specifically what he means by that. The key is that he taught the harmony of all the world religions on the basis of this doctrine. By one or more of these four yogas, attain the goal of life, which is God realization, enlightenment. What he says is, the argument proceeds in two steps. Number one, every world religion corresponds to one or more of the four yogas. If you study any religion, you'll find that there's a kind of predominant emphasis either on devotion toward a personal God, or on active service of some sort, or unattached action, or mental control, psychic control, or it's very philosophical, or some combination. It doesn't have to be that it represents only one yoga. It could be more than one yoga. But this is a very, very important insight that Vivekananda had. Every one of the world religions corresponds to one or more of the four yogas. And the second step in his argument, or it's really the conclusion of the argument, therefore every world religion is a direct path to enlightenment. So the first premise is that any one of these yogas can give us enlightenment. Second premise, every world religion corresponds to one or more of these yogas. Therefore, any one of these world religions can take us to the highest goal, the highest spiritual goal of awakening, of illumination, of enlightenment. But he also went further than that. Swami Vivekananda, I discussed this in detail in my book, Swami Vivekananda's Vedantic cosmopolitanism, I use the phrase religious cosmopolitanism. And what I mean by that is Swami Vivekananda often taught that we can and should actively learn from religions other than our own. We'll be grounded firmly in one religion, but we'll also try to learn from other religions and expose ourselves to other religions and actively try to incorporate aspects of other religious traditions into our own. Okay? And the logic behind that is that every religion has something to teach us. Why? Because each religion corresponds to one of the yogas, and the ideal human being is the one who can combine all four yogas to the best of his or her ability. And the fourth statement that Swami Vivekananda makes, the fourth Mahavakya, great saying, let me remind you again, this is the whole of religion. Doctrines or dogmas or rituals or books or temples or forms are but secondary details. So Swami Vivekananda was well aware that different religions differ at the level of doctrine. They disagree on all sorts of things. One question, simple example, did Christ die on the cross? You might think, well, yeah, of course he died on the cross, but that's not everybody believes that. Muslims don't believe that Christ died on the cross. In the Quran, that's not accepted. But of course, the Bible accepts it, for instance. That's an example of a conflict at the level of doctrine between different religions. Is rebirth true? Are we reborn? Orthodox Abrahamic religions say no. Hinduism and Buddhism say yes, right? So there's all sorts of conflicts. What does Vivekananda say about these doctrinal disputes across the world religions? He says, doctrines are secondary details. Not that they're completely unimportant, but they're not the be-all, end-all. They belong to the non-essential side of religion. What's more, even if some religions are wrong about something, so look, the example of Christ, whether Christ died on the cross. One of those religions is wrong. Either Islam is wrong that Christ didn't die on the cross, or Christianity is wrong. Right? So there had to have been a historical fact of the matter. What Sri Ramakrishna and Swami Vivekananda say is, even the errors in a religion don't substantially detract from their ability to lead to the highest goal. That's the important thing. And Sri Ramakrishna used to use a wonderful example. He said, imagining that people, wear watches. He said, everybody thinks his or her own watch is right. My watch tells the exactly perfect time. And he says, but no watch tells the exactly correct time. But everybody's watch is good enough to get the job done. Even if you're off by a few seconds or a minute even, nobody's going to kill you for, It still gets the job done. You're able to get to where you need to go on time and this and that. That's the idea. In spite of its doctrinal mistakes, and every religion has some mistakes, it can still be an effective path to salvation or enlightenment, whatever you want to call it. So, to sum up very briefly, what is Vedanta according to Swami Vivekananda? What is this meta-religion of Vedanta? Let me just give 6. Of course, he gave the 4. I'm just going to unpack it a little more. So 6 things briefly. 1, the infinite divine reality is not only the impersonal, non-dual, pure consciousness of Advaita Vedanta, some schools of Buddhism, but also the personal God, which Sri Ramakrishna and Vivekananda used to call Shakti, which manifests in countless forms. Manifests as Kali, manifests as Christ, manifests as Krishna, and so on and so forth. Allah. Allah is not a form. He's formless but personal. But that too is an aspect of the same personal dimension of the divine. Second key tenet of Vedanta. The goal of life is to realize the infinite divine reality in any form or aspect. And there's no higher or lower. Not everybody has to realize pure consciousness, for instance. That's to give you one example. And not everybody has to realize God is Christ or God the Father. Not everybody has to realize God is Allah. But everybody has to realize God, ultimately. That's the goal of life. God, understood in this very broad way, as the infinite divine reality, which is personal in one aspect and impersonal in another. Third key tenet of Vedanta, any one of the 4 yogas can lead us to the realization of some form or aspect of the divine. Fourth, every world religion corresponds to one of these 4 yogas. Fifth, therefore every religion is equally capable of taking us to the goal of enlightenment or spiritual realization. And 6, we can make more rapid spiritual progress. We can enrich our spiritual lives by learning from religions other than our own. That's what I've been calling religious cosmopolitanism. So keep these in the back of our minds.